Have you ever noticed how some people just seem to naturally become leaders, while others, even those with the right traits, don't?
Yeah, I see that all the time.
The question has fascinated people for a long time, right?
Absolutely.
Today, we're diving deep into a paper that explores this whole process of leadership emergence. It's not just about charisma or being the loudest person in the room. This research looks at it as a process, something that happens at all these different levels, like from single interactions to whole companies. And the paper digs into various theories and frameworks to understand how and why this all happens.
That's great. So much more useful than just a list of traits.
Right, exactly. To kick things off, maybe you could talk a little bit about how this paper defines leadership emergence. Because it's probably not as simple as just the person who takes charge.
Right. It's not just about taking charge. They define it as the process of gaining influence and being seen as a leader by other people. And this can be implicit or explicit.
So it's not necessarily tied to a specific job title or position.
It can apply to those who become influential even without a specific position.
Which I think is something that we see all the time. Like there are those go-to people, even though they're not quote-unquote in charge. So this definition is super important because it opens up a whole new way of understanding leadership. It's not just about hierarchy.
It's way more interesting than that. Yeah.
So how does this paper actually break it all down?
One of the key things is that they emphasize that leadership emergence isn't a one-size-fits-all phenomenon.
Right.
It can happen at different levels, from individual traits and how they kind of interact with each other, to how people interact with each other, all the way up to groups, and then even the entire organization.
So they call this levels of analysis.
Levels of analysis, exactly.
Leadership is going to look different depending on where you're focusing your attention.
Right, whether you're thinking about individuals or the whole organization.
Now, are they saying that individual traits don't matter at all? Because I know we've talked a lot about, books on leadership, and there's always stuff about charisma and confidence. So how does this fit in here?
It's not that individual traits are irrelevant. It's more that they're just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay, I'm listening.
And this is where the paper gets really interesting. They introduced this concept called unit-level properties, or ULPs. It sounds a little jargony, but they're basically, think of it like the secret sauce. How those smaller pieces combine to create something bigger.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these ULPs.
Okay, so there are 3 types of them, and each has its own influence on how leadership emerges. Imagine you're joining a new team, and at first, you fit in, play by the rules.
You don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly.
Right.
But over time, you prove yourself. You build trust.
Show them what you can do.
Right. And eventually, the team grants you what they call idiosyncrasy credit. You've earned the right to be a little different. You can suggest those big changes because you built up that capital.
Take that street cred you earned. When you're new, you can't just waltz in and tell everyone what to do.
And that street cred, that idiosyncrasy credit, exists at the group level. Okay, now imagine you've got a bunch of skills. You're a great communicator, organized, good at problem solving. Those skills combine to create something new at a higher level, competence. Right? And that is what's called a compositional ULP. Similar things at a lower level are adding up to a greater whole.
I got it. So global is about group perception. Compositional is combining individual skills. What's the third kind?
All right, this is where things get really fun. Compilational ULPs. This is where the magic really happens. It happens through interaction. Think charisma. It's not just a person's charm. It's how they behave, how others see them, and the situation. So a leader might seem super charismatic during a crisis, rallying everyone, but on a normal day, they don't stand out as much.
Right. Different context.
It's the combination of all those things that creates that charisma, that leadership.
So it's not just who you are, it's how you interact with others and the context you're in.
Yeah, exactly.
This is really fascinating. It's making me see why this paper is so important. So now I'm curious to hear how they use specific leadership theories as examples to show how these levels of analysis and these ULPs all play out. Let's start with the individual level. What theories are they using there?
Well, they start with what they call trait theories. The idea that certain personality traits, like being an extrovert or being conscientious, might predict if you'll be a leader. But the paper points out that research is mixed on that. It's not as simple as, oh, you're an extrovert, you're going to lead.
Right. I've definitely worked with introverts who are amazing leaders and plenty of extroverts who, well...
Right, exactly.
So it's more nuanced. What else is there besides those personality traits at the individual level?
Well, we were just talking about charisma, and they use that as an example of a compilational ULP. It shows how it emerges from behavior, perceptions, and the situation. They call this charismatic leadership theory.
Wait, so you're saying charisma isn't just something you're born with? Like someone who's not traditionally seen as charismatic, maybe they could develop that and emerge as a leader if the situation is right.
That's exactly what this research suggests.
Wow.
Yeah, it really challenges that idea that some people are just natural-born leaders. It's more about understanding how different factors shape the perception of leadership.
So it's not just nature versus nurture, it's both, and it's the context, it's everything together.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting. So we've got traits, we've got charisma. What else is happening at that individual level?
They also talk about what's called implicit leadership theory, which basically says that we all have these mental models of what a leader should be like.
Okay.
And so we're more likely to see someone as a leader if they fit those models.
So first impressions really matter. If someone walks in looking and acting like we expect a leader to, we're more likely to go along with it.
It's more complex than that, but the research suggests that those implicit biases can play a role in how we see potential leaders.
This is fascinating. So we've tackled the individual level. What happens when we move to relationships between people? How does leadership emerge in that context?
Well, that takes us to the dyadic level, focusing on those one-on-one connections. And the paper looks at a theory called leader-member exchange theory, or LMX, yeah, for short.
It sounds a little complicated.
It's actually pretty intuitive once you get the hang of it. Just think about your relationships at work. You probably have some coworkers that you connect with more easily.
Oh, yes.
Where there's that mutual trust and respect.
You kind of click.
Yeah, you click. You go the extra mile for each other, share information, maybe even have some fun.
I know exactly what you mean. There are people I would happily help out with a project, even if it's outside my job description, just because I enjoy working with them.
Exactly. And that's what LMX theory is all about. Those high-quality relationships, that's where leadership starts to come out.
Interesting.
It's a two-way street. The leader supports and guides, the follower contributes their skills and commitment. They both benefit.
So are you saying that I actually have a role in shaping the leadership of my boss?
Yeah.
Just by how I interact with them?
Absolutely. It's not a one-way thing. It's about the dynamic between two people. You demonstrate trust, competence, you go above and beyond, you influence how your leader acts. You're shaping it without realizing it.
Whoa, I've never thought of it that way. That changes things.
Right.
So it's less about the hierarchy and more about a web of relationships where everyone influences everyone else.
Exactly. And it all ties back to those unit-level properties. Those good leader-member relationships can actually lead to the emergence of leadership at a higher level.
So those small interactions, like the daily things, can have a ripple effect. So let's move up to the group level, because I know things get even more interesting there.
At the group level, the paper looks at theories like that idiosyncrasy credit theory that we were talking about earlier.
Right, that earning street cred idea.
Yep. Someone who starts by fitting in, they prove they're competent, build trust, they're more likely to be the leader later on because they've earned that right to maybe shake things up a little bit.
Right, they have the freedom to be different because they've built up that goodwill. That makes me think about colleagues who can call out problems or suggest new things, but do it in a way that doesn't offend anyone. It's like they've earned the right to be heard.
They understand the social dynamics. They're influencing people in a way that works.
So it's not enough to just have good ideas. You need to be able to navigate those relationships to get those ideas across.
Exactly. You've got to know how to work the system.
Okay, and what about functional leadership theory? I know that was another one you mentioned.
Functional leadership theory. Yeah, this one shifts the focus away from the individual and looks more at what the group needs. It says leaders emerge by fulfilling those needs.
Makes sense.
So that could be anything, providing clear direction, coordinating tasks, emotional support.
Maybe sometimes you need a cheerleader, sometimes you need a taskmaster, and it just depends on the situation.
Exactly. Different groups need different things. And a good leader can kind of sense that.
This is really making me rethink some past team projects. Maybe it wasn't about anyone's personality. Maybe it was about whether we had the right mix of roles to actually work together.
That's a really good insight. Now, you ready for the big picture? The organizational level, yeah.
Hit me with it.
All right, so the paper looks at upper echelons theory, which focuses on how those top execs, their characteristics, shape the whole organization.
It's like their leadership trickles down.
Totally a trickle-down effect. Their personality, their values, all of that. It influences who gets promoted, what behaviors are rewarded, and how people see leadership in the whole company.
Makes sense. So hiring the right CEO is a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely huge. And then there's this other really fascinating theory called complex adaptive systems theory, which is a totally different way of thinking about how leadership happens in companies.
All right, this sounds like fun. I love a challenge.
It's a bit of a mind bender.
Good.
But basically, you picture an organization as this complex ecosystem, right? All these individuals and teams interacting.
All those moving parts.
All the moving parts, adapting, influencing each other. And leadership, it's not just about formal positions. It can emerge organically from anywhere within that system.
Yeah.
It's the flow of information and relationships.
So it's less about control, more about responding to the needs and challenges that come up.
Yeah.
And it can come from anywhere.
It's a much more dynamic and fluid idea of leadership. Like, think about how often those innovative solutions, they come from the front lines, not necessarily those in charge.
I see what you mean. It's like they're closer to the problem. So this is making me wonder if we're too focused on finding and training individual leaders, when maybe what we should be doing is designing organizations where leadership can just, like, emerge naturally.
And that actually leads perfectly into the next part of the paper, which is all about the implications of this research for leadership development.
Perfect. Because now I really want to know, what do we do with all this knowledge?
Right.
How do we create better leaders?
And this is where the paper gets really practical. It challenges how we usually think about leadership development.
Like sending people to those seminars to learn leadership skills.
Exactly.
I've been to a few, lots of speeches, team building exercises, but do they actually work?
Well, the paper says we need to think differently. We have to consider all those different levels and forms of leadership emergence. It's not just about individual skills.
So instead of trying to make everyone fit the same mold, we need to create an environment where different types of leadership can, come out.
Exactly. It's kind of like gardening. You wouldn't plant a cactus in a rainforest and expect it to do well.
Right.
Different plants need different conditions to thrive.
Love the analogy. So how do we create that kind of leadership ecosystem in a company? What can we actually do?
Well, first, we need to focus less on individual development and more on the whole system. It's not just training people. It's creating a culture where leadership can happen at all levels.
So a culture of empowerment.
Give people more autonomy, encourage collaboration, reward those who step up no matter their title.
So we don't wait for someone to be appointed the leader. We look for people showing leadership and support them.
Yeah. Make it more fluid, more dynamic. Anyone can contribute.
And knowing about those unit-level properties we talked about, that could help design better programs.
Absolutely. For example, if we want to develop charisma, we need to give people chances to practice influencing others, building relationships, communicating their vision.
So they get to practice in those situations where charisma is important.
Exactly. And if we want to cultivate idiosyncrasy credit, we need to build trust. Create a safe space where people feel comfortable taking risks, sharing ideas.
This whole paper has really changed how I think about leadership. It's not about finding the chosen one. It's about creating a place where anyone can lead.
And what's exciting is that we're just starting to understand this. There's so much more to learn, especially as the world keeps changing.
I think that's what I love about these deep dives. It's not just summarizing the research. It's about figuring out what it means, why it matters.
And for me, the biggest takeaway from this paper is that we need to change how we think about leadership development. It's not about that old school top-down control or individual heroes. It's about working together, focusing on the system.
Leadership is less about position and more about purpose. Less about ego, more about making a difference.
Well said. And I think if we use these insights, we can unlock so much potential in individuals, teams, and whole organizations.
For our listeners, think about the dynamics in your own workplace. Where do you see leadership happening, and how can you create an environment where more people can step up and lead? Leadership isn't just for those at the top. It's a process that can happen anywhere, anytime. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Until next time, keep diving deep.